The bill is passed.
Voter ID moves forward, and a push to add another tool to eliminate ineffective teachers from the classroom. Details in Capitol Report. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's Capitol Report. I'm Julie Bartkey. On Wednesday evening, Governor Mark Dayton gave his second State of the State address. His speech focused on his priorities, proposals, and a positive tone that utilized the word please several times.
I often wonder how our children and grandchildren will judge our stewardship. Will they thank us for leaving our state, nation, and world in better condition than when we inherited it? Or will they ask, how could you have left us with this mess? The answer is for us to decide. Yet even though 97,000 more Minnesotans are working today than at the depth of the Great Recession, there are still more than 168,000 Minnesotans who want to work but cannot find employment. They must be our #1 priority. So I say to legislators, let's take your best ideas and my best ideas and turn them into jobs, and let's do it now. One national study estimates that my bonding bill would create 21,700 jobs, most of them in the private sector. If you're skeptical, divide by 2. That's still more than 10,000 Minnesotans now unemployed who could be working all over our state. Legislators, you are obviously entitled to your own preferred projects. I ask, however, that you develop your priorities quickly and pass a bonding bill in the next month. The sooner you act, the sooner several thousand unemployed Minnesotans will be doing the work that those repairs and renovations require. Pass the bonding bill now, please. Some of you reportedly want to avoid voting on a stadium until after next fall's elections. That would be terribly unfair to the several thousand unemployed Minnesotans who could be working on that project this year, and to the Vikings. Pass the stadium bill this session, please. Sitting upstairs are 2 Minnesota veterans. Mr. Stephen Jackson served the United States Army for 15 years in places like Iraq. Mr. Jack Marshall served for 6 years in the Air Force and did a tour in Kuwait. Mr. Jackson, Mr. Marshall, thank you. These 2 heroes served our state and nation with great patriotism, valor, and honor. Now they can't find jobs. That is wrong. So pass a Jobs Now bill and expand the Minnesota GI Bill, please. Let us resolve that we will conduct this session's financial affairs responsibly. No more borrowing. Minnesotans want more efficient government. They want better services. And they want us to cooperate and compromise in order to deliver them. I stand ready to work with legislators on both sides of the aisle to enact laws that will better Minnesota.
GOP leaders countered, saying they have many of the same priorities as the governor, but different ways to get them accomplished.
The state of the state is good, by the way. Again, I would simply, as we so often have suggested, a $5 billion deficit, $1 billion surplus, and let us never forget that. I think that is the major turnaround with respect to the state of Minnesota as we think about the last year. And so going forward, we look forward to working with the governor. He mentioned certainly his jobs initiatives, and we're going to take a look at that. Obviously, we're going to have a bonding bill. It may not be exactly what he has, but we're going to try to work through and make something happen there. We'll see about the Viking Stadium. I would suggest that we need his leadership in terms of making that happen. I don't think there's anything other than, anything like the governor that can move that forward.
Where do you differ with the governor on how to best to create jobs?
Well, we believe that it starts, begins, and ends in the private sector. Making sure that Minnesota's business economy is competitive. I think the permitting bill that we worked on is a great step forward, but we shouldn't rest on that.
We weren't called incompetent to govern or anything like that. so that, you know, that kind of rhetoric was absent, and thank goodness it was. And I think, you know, he extended himself in a spirit of cooperation to us, and we'll certainly reach back to him and certainly work with him towards a, you know, successful session.
A proposal will move its way through the Senate shortly that will increase the price of cigarettes by $1.29 a pack. The Senate author, Carla Nelson, joins me now to explain what the purpose is behind this legislation. Thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. It's great to be here. Well, this legislation really has three aims. One, deter youth smoking. We know that youth are the most price sensitive, so increasing the cost of a pack of cigarettes, we know will deter youth smoking, keep them from a lifelong addiction. Two, the increased revenues will pay back that school shift that was part of the compromise with the governor last year. And then revenues from when that is filled, about a little under 3 years, revenues will go to buy down a very unfriendly tax we have against job creators called the business property tax.
Okay. We'll break it down, these elements, shortly, but first let's go to the idea of trying to prevent curb teen smoking. And according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there are currently 1 in 6 teenagers smoke at this point. How effective do you think your legislation will be in curbing this?
Well, research has shown that for every 10% increase in tobacco, you get a 6.5% decrease in youth smoking and 2% decrease in adult smoking. There's been 105 tobacco increases legislation in the last few years across the nation, and the research is very clear. Youth are the most price sensitive, and as Republicans, we believe the more you tax something, the less you have of it.
Okay, and we'll get back to that in just a moment, but your legislation also puts in an estimate of about $320 million of new state revenue per biennium, and as you mentioned, those states will be distributed to repay the school shift and to reduce a property tax. But the reserve funds are expected to be paid back before school shifts. Does your legislation take this into account?
Yes, you're referring to statutorily, we're required that any reserves go to pay back the cash flow account and budget reserves. We're about $5 million now, if the forecast holds, from paying back those budget reserves. The third thing would be the school shift, and certainly my legislation would preempt in that it's not using surplus funds, it's actually funds directly from the cigarette tax.
Okay. Your financial estimate, is it based on, I'm curious, is it based on the current number of smokers? And if so, does it take into account any potential decrease as well, which would then affect, obviously, the bottom line?
Yes, it does. We do know that as you increase the cost, and the idea is that there would be less people smoking, less tobacco use. So I believe it does. It's called an elasticity factor, and that is included in the estimate. All
right, Senator. Last year during budget negotiations, the governor offered up a similar proposal, $1 per pack, to try to help pay for a variety of things. Speaker Kurt Zellers called that proposal, quote, very disappointing and a step backwards. And he has said that taxes are just not, new taxes are a deal breaker for his caucus. He has said that in the past. What kind of support do you think you can gain with this proposal now?
Well, it's a very bipartisan proposal. I have Republican support. I anticipate Democrat support as well. Not all of us were part of those final budget negotiations. Those were between about 4 or 5 people. I can tell you that many of us felt that the school shift that took place under our watch, $700 million, was not the best way to go. I personally find it preferable to increase tax on something as cigarettes, which are damaging to our youth, increasing health care costs. We have about $3 billion of health care costs in Minnesota due to smoking. I would prefer that we increase that cost rather than taking money from our schools and taxing our job creators.
What are you hearing from both constituents and other members at this point?
Actually, it's been a very mixed, but a lot of support, a lot of great support, called courageous and needed. It's really, I think, a part of smarter tax policy.
Okay, Senator, we will track your legislation, of course, throughout session. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
getting ineffective teachers out of the classroom. That's the focus of a bill sponsored by Senator Pam Wolf. The Senate Education Committee heard testimony on that proposal. It would add elements other than seniority to be used as criteria when a school board is cutting a teaching position.
I generally keep my comments pretty policy and principle driven, but as a father, you're going to have to indulge me. Mr. Strange was a teacher at Lakeville South, where my son is currently a sophomore. And in full disclosure, his wife is my legislative assistant. However, I did not know Mr. Strange at the time she was hired. And because he is gone, you heard the credentials that he has. There actually may not be a teacher at the school to teach the classes that perhaps my son, who's a good math student, would have the opportunity to take. So setting aside whether there may be some unfairness in evaluation systems and the like, if we start with the premise that schools are about the students, in your mind, is that a good outcome?
Madam Chair, Senator Thompson, I think that probably the main reason that that talented teacher is not there is because of a lack of funding.
You may choose to blame it on budget constraints, but the fact of the matter is there's a system in place to let teachers go that is not based upon their ability to teach a specific class or necessarily their ability in general, that is dictated by a system of seniority that results in that kind of injustice.
Madam Chair and Senator Thompson, I appreciate your comments. However, if we can get the evaluation system to work, as all of the union advocates have stated, because we want quality teachers, if the evaluation system is working, we will not have to do that, because seniority should not, the evaluation should not take place at the time of seniority. We should have quality teachers in every single one of our positions, and then seniority is not a problem.
Senator Pam Wolf authors the bill. She's here now to discuss it. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Let's begin with what will your bill do and what won't it do?
Well, what the bill will do is it's designed to go into place when there is a teacher layoff that a school district needs to make. What it will not do is it is not designed to remove ineffective teachers out of the classroom. What it is designed to do is say that when there is a need for a layoff, the school districts will base their layoffs, number one, on licensure, number two, on teacher performance in the results of an evaluation, and then number three, as a result of seniority. Currently, it's seniority only, and so it will change the order of how teachers are not only laid off, but also how they're recalled in the event of a layoff.
Senator Wiger and other critics contend that there is a newly created evaluation system in place. Why not give that time to see if it works before introducing new legislation?
Well, the evaluation, it's not a matter of the evaluation working. Even if the evaluation is in place and it's working, that still doesn't address the use of the evaluation in a layoff. The evaluation, once it's in place and working, the same question would still arise in the case of a layoff. It would still be that teachers are being laid off in the order of when they were hired. And what this bill does is make it so that we're going to have that evaluation in place, and now we're going to use this evaluation to determine the order in which we lay teachers off and the order in which we hire them back. And as far as it being in place, it's not going to be in place for several years. This bill will not take effect until the year 16-17. So we are looking at still 5 years down the road before this bill would go into effect.
What are your thoughts on some of the testimony that occurred? One being that it's centered on the fact that the focus of teacher termination seems to be in May, when a testifier believed that it should be an ongoing issue. What are your thoughts?
It absolutely should be an ongoing issue, but this bill does not address that. And teacher effectiveness should be addressed separately, and there should be a way of removing an ineffective teacher at any time. I completely agree that we should not wait for a layoff to remove an ineffective teacher. This bill strictly affects when a layoff needs to occur. But absolutely, we should have a way of removing ineffective teachers at any time, not just waiting for a layoff.
So, Senator Wolf, what do you think of the argument that new teachers in particular need a little bit of time to prove that they are also effective and not just terminated because maybe they test to be ineffective at that time?
With new teachers, what this bill would do as amended is it would allow the school boards the flexibility to consider new teachers when it comes to the layoff process. So if you have a new teacher that's been there and they're still considered new after 3 years, let's say they've been teaching for 3 years and they're still a probationary teacher, but they've been shown to be highly effective, that the school board should have the flexibility to include them when determining the order of layoff. So if they're highly effective, even though they're probationary, and there's an ineffective tenured teacher, the school board should be able to have that opportunity to choose which of the teachers they want to fill that position.
And Senator Wolf, you're a teacher. What did you learn when you were in the trenches or are in the trenches that you're bringing here to the Capitol, and particularly with this legislation?
Well, one of the things with this legislation that was mentioned several times in testimony was the concept of experience and seniority. And the reality is seniority does not always equal experience. For example, with our tenure system, when a teacher becomes tenured in a school district, they're pretty much locked into that school district forever. Because if they leave that school district, they lose their tenure, and when they go to another school district, they're considered a first-year teacher. I did have that happen with me. I had 10 years of experience. I switched to a different school district, which that year happened to have a layoff, and I was bumped and replaced by a teacher who not only had, I think she was like 5 or 6 years, had been teaching, but did not want to come to the school where I was teaching, did not want to teach that class, did not want to do what I was doing, but also wanted to have a job. So there was no flexibility for the school board to say, you know, we have another option here. But because I was considered a probationary teacher, like a first-year teacher, my experience of 10 years did not count in their decision-making. So by adding probationary teachers to that list of potential opportunity or choices for school districts, they could have opted to keep me in that position instead of having somebody else take that position. And that's just one of many. People always assume that probationary teachers are in the first 3 years, and that's not always the case.
So do you support the teacher tenure system?
That's a tricky question because I ultimately support having the best teachers in front of kids. And I would like to see a system where, and part of me, the school boards want to be able to eliminate probationary teachers for any reason, and the unions want to have tenure to protect teachers and, make it real difficult to remove ineffective teachers. So I kind of want to go from both ends and say the bottom line is we want effective teachers in the classroom. And if we can do that within the parameters of tenure, great. If not, then maybe we need to look at removing tenure. If we can keep our young teachers that are brand new, that are effective teachers, keep them in the schools and teaching, that's awesome too. And I'd like to see a system where, if a teacher does change schools, that they're not penalized. And you could have a good teacher that's been there for several years but moves to another school, and they might go for year after year after year of being let go because they're probationary teachers.
And I think it's fair to say that members on both sides of the aisle agree with trying to keep the best teachers in the classrooms. Do you think your legislation will be another tool to do this?
Absolutely. I think this will be a big first step in going that direction of making sure that we are keeping the best teachers in front of the students and not getting into all the political rhetoric of this teacher's right versus that teacher's right. All teachers are represented. All teachers, whether they're their first year or they've been there for 20 years, whichever teacher is the best for those students, that's who should be in front of that classroom.
Okay, Senator Wolf, thank you for coming in and discussing your legislation.
Thank you.
Nearly a dozen speakers and hundreds of citizens came together in the Capitol Rotunda to make their voices count this legislative session. African American Lobby Day gives this group the opportunity to articulate their wishes to the legislature.
In a state where there is 13% of the population are people of color, there are not one, no, not two, no, 3% of the elected representatives in this state are people of color. 3%. And I wonder how this is the people's house if there is only 3% of us here. If we were represented equally to our population, there would be 26 elected senators and representatives here in the state. But we have 7. 7 senators. No, not 7 senators. We have 3 senators and 4 reps. I hear people call this the people's house. We need those representatives. We need your voices. And if you think it is not time for you to get in the game, if you think that there are no consequences for sitting on the sideline, I'm here to tell you otherwise.
Senator Chuck Wiger sits on the Senate Education Committee. He's here to discuss a variety of education issues. Senator, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Julie.
Let's begin with Senator Wolf's bill. Do you agree with the idea that seniority should or should not be a form of teacher evaluation? So in essence, do you agree with her bill that seniority shouldn't necessarily be a part of the equation?
I don't support the bill as it's currently written, and I believe that we need to look at the big picture as to the more important issue as the evaluation tool that's being put together right now. We put together a legislation last year in special session which calls for a comprehensive evaluation system to be developed, ready in a few years, and we're hoping this instrument is going to provide fair, objective evaluations for all teachers.
Senator Wolf is a teacher, and
Yes.
she says she's taking tools that she had learned and trying to bring them here to the legislature. So just kind of explain to me your rationale and why you do or do not support this bill, considering she's bringing in years of experience when she helped craft this legislation.
Okay. And I commend Senator Wolf for her role as a teacher and what experience she brings and shares with us. I would submit, though, that tens of thousands of teachers would offer a different perspective on this subject. I want to point out overall that we have excellent teachers in Minnesota. Are there some that aren't effective? Yes. Just like in any profession, you can identify a group that needs remediation or perhaps needs to exit. And Ed Minnesota would be the first group to tell you that if there is a teacher that's not effective, during that first 3 years of probation, the decision can be made then. And if it's after you have tenure, then the principal can go through a process of putting you on notice and providing remediation steps. And if that doesn't work, then that teacher should be out of the classroom. And that is what is supposed to be done. And we ask that we get this comprehensive evaluation system in place. If there's an ineffective teacher in a school and that teacher is allowed to continue, then I say, what's going on with the principal? You have tools already, let's use them.
Okay, Senator, let's shift gears to your bill, which would be compulsory attendance. You are asking that students be required to remain in school until they're 18 or graduate, whichever comes sooner.
Yes.
Why do you support this?
I support it because the person's best chance for a job, to help their self-esteem, to help maximize their potential, is to not only graduate from high school, but then to go on and to go to college or to go to vocational school, but to get a skill that can align with the workforce. If you don't graduate from high school, your chances of success are increasingly diminished. President Obama just made a call in the State of the Nation to encourage the Congress to enact legislation for compulsory attendance to age 18 or graduation. Over half the states have done this. Regrettably, Minnesota has not. It's at 16, and it's just a matter of tough love that if a student is wanting to drop out during maybe those very difficult years of 16, 17, where they want to make another choice, they need to know the consequences are significant. It's not only for their potential decreased earnings, but also potential involvement in the criminal justice system, potential costs for the state. And when you look at the thousands of students that are impacted, it's something that we must take leadership on.
Is this a bill, if it's passed and signed into law, that you can see, A, being enforced, and B, what kind of penalties would be in place?
It definitely can be enforced. We have truancy laws now that are enforced through the county attorney's office, and in Ramsey County, for example, John Choi, the county attorney, has a program where they work directly with the schools, the parents, and for the student that might be truant. The program was set up by Susan Gertner, actually, the former county attorney. It's been looked at as a model for other counties, which have actually, many have adopted. So they do look out to see that people come back. Hey, if a student isn't going to go to school, then we need to get that person back. We need to get their parents engaged in this too. And of course, that is often going to be the root cause to the problem, where there hasn't been enough positive involvement with the parent, and that goes way, way back.
Do you have bipartisan support on this legislation?
I do, but there's also some bipartisan opposition. There's concern by some that these hard-to-reach students, you're not going to reach them now. Let's try to improve schools so everyone wants to be there. I say that's fine. We all should share that goal. But at the same time, like the majority of states and like what President Obama said, we need to set this as a requirement. These students, they're not even emancipated. Their chance of success is so poor if they do not complete schools. So we need to show that tough love, if you will, and say, stay in school.
Okay, Senator Wiger, with those words, thank you for your time today. We certainly appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Voter ID cleared its first hurdle in the Senate, passing the Local Government and Elections Committee. After 5 hours of testimony, committee members focused on amendments and disagreement on legislating by Constitution and the broader issue of the right to vote.
There's different civic organizations that are following this legislation on both sides of the issue. It's keen interest. We know that. Just showing the people that are in the room today and at the last one shows a keen interest. And Minnesotans don't always agree. But to think that we're going to deny the representation of even one of our citizens from bringing an idea forward in the legislature, and it's even more impactful when it's been polled by a legitimate news entity that it has high popularity, I guess I have to reaffirm. I just don't know where anybody's been if they haven't been following this issue.
I've seen polls that once when educated, the public is not supportive of this. Once they have an education of what this means, they're not educated, they're not in support of this. We've seen group after group of disenfranchised voters. I expect you've all heard from the students that I've heard from the senior citizens who are saying, wait a minute, this is not what we expected, this is not what we thought. And I have no problem with constituents bringing issues forward. I just don't want to see it in the Constitution. We just do not need a constitutional amendment on this. Senator Newman has every right to bring a legislation forward, but that is what we're here for. We're here to do legislation, not constitutional amendments.
That concludes this week's program. From all of us at Senate Media and House Public Information Services, I'm Julie Bartkey. Thanks for watching Capitol Report.